Greetings gamers, Tim Kirk here again, and I originally shot a video to discuss a few different things, but I was kind of all over the place, so I'm reshooting it in the hopes that I can stay a little more focused this time. First of all, I want to discuss the ideas of randomness and creativity. Ordinarily, when I sit down to create a game or a game setting, I start by thinking what I want in the game. I put these pieces together. It may be just a setting, it may be an entire game, but I start by going, I want A, B, C, D, E, F, and so on, and start building those components. Recently, however, between 6 months and a year ago, I was playing around with some random generators online when I was asked to run a basic D&D game. And I was like, well, I don't really want to use a pre-made world. I don't have any ideas off the top of my head for D&D other than just a generic vanilla D&D setting. So instead, I started rolling up a bunch of things at random, using some random word generators, random name generators, random map generators, and combined all these elements into a whole. It's not finished yet. I still have quite a bit to go. I've still got to color a couple of the maps that I'm doing digitally, and it takes me several days to weeks to do the process that gets the kind of maps that I am now enjoying. Got one of the land masses done. It's actually 2 continents, but it's one landmass, sort of. So it is, I used random generators to create that map, and then I inked it and colored it myself. I randomly rolled up some random god descriptions and started building the pantheon that I was going to use for the primary landmass that I was going to game on, and did a couple things to generate some history for that setting. Now, the history of the setting is a little amorphous. I've had some ideas for a D&D campaign world as well that I wanted to put in there, and I'm not sure if I'm going to keep all those elements or all the random elements or just mix the two and let some of it be the mythic reality and some of it be the historical reality, because those things are different. When somebody says a god does A, that is their interpretation of many cases natural events. Well, in this case, it may be that, or it may be an interpretation of the events that really occurred by the beings who were there at the time. Most notably, I started out with an empire called the Empire of the 10,000 Kingdoms, and it was basically a huge, almost world-spanning. It spanned the major land masses of the time. Collection of city-states and their support farms and etc. There are smaller towns that support the bigger city-states, and their alliances between each other, basically forming an empire under a single ruler. It was humanity-driven, and it was very highly advanced in terms of magic. However, they got hubristic and basically laid waste to each other, taking their petty rivalries to an epic, apocalyptic level. And the fallout of that is eventually the fantasy setting that I have. It explains why there is a lot of monsters, a lot of very powerful, underground supernatural places, etc., and so on. Because it was once this one huge landmass that everybody warred with each other, and often built underground bunkers to protect themselves from the fallout of unleashing these terrible, terrible weapons. Now, most of the mythic setting is randomly rolled, while the ages that this world has gone through are also randomly rolled, and then I have imported my own ideas of what that means and descriptions of what it means. And I'm normally a very specific creator. I like to create specific things that I'm inspired by, but this random collection of things that I've basically sorted through has given me a lot of new ideas, things I haven't tried in the past, while still allowing me to keep it true to my own writing style and writing flavor. It's kind of exhilarating and unburdening of all of the brain effort that I put into this kind of work. And that's one of the reasons I think that I've always enjoyed in the old superhero games, Marvel superheroes and villains and vigilantes, the random roll character generation. Now, much of the time I have a very specific character I would like to play. But sometimes I will just sit there and roll up random characters. I do the same thing with the newer game icons just to see what I get. So for Hearts and Souls, I've been working on a random system that is more an idea generator than a specifics generator. Instead of specifically generating a character that looks exactly like A, it generates a origin sentence, sort of your quick pitch to the editor of this is where my character comes from, and this is kind of what he's like, rather than a full forged character. Now, I've added little bits here and there that will allow you to also use that little part to create a full-fledged character, but the major section of the system can be used entirely on its own, and that was my purpose, is that I wanted to generate ideas rather than very specific and very narrow pegs to go in the holes, because I believe that the imagination and creativity can be utilized with the random aspects to create some interesting things. And this, of course, doesn't change the fact that Hearts and Souls' default, as I see it, manner of character creation is make it up. Get with your GM, get with the pitch that he is wanting to run for campaign, or your ideas of a pitch that you shared with him and he's decided to use, or whatever, and work with them so that you make a character that is both suitably driven and suitably appropriate for that game session. Because that's really, I have an idea for a comic book character. Let's get it, down into a role-playing game character. Let's try that. I like that idea because personally I think that random systems can go a little crazy, and not everyone is like me where I look at the overall picture and then start filing it down until you have a very interesting core, and they've filed off the rough edges that random creation creates. So I want to offer both options, but the default is always going to be make it up with your own imagination. The second is, of course, random roll, and the third will be a system for distributing ranks among your character stats and powers that you choose to have an interesting character. But I like the freeing aspect of randomization. What do you think? Do you like random elements to help shape your campaign worlds, your maps, your settings, your characters? Do you prefer randomness over point systems, or make it up so it fits the campaign? Let me know. I would be interested in hearing, because for me, while I've used random stuff back in the day when all I played was D&D, that's been a very long time, and now I do a mix to just see what I can get and see what I can enjoy. On top of that, on top of the randomness versus consistency kind of topic, I was wanting to discuss some deeper ideas about game design. And that comes to, do you prefer a game setting that's rules match the setting, as in the game is a thing to itself? You go and buy that specific game world with game name and it has its own game rules. Or do you enjoy games that share a common game rule set, or generic game rules sets that you adapt worlds to or build worlds for? To give you an example of each category, Dungeons and Dragons is a multi-world game that you have the game, you have some base ideas of a game setting, but most of that is then adapted to individual persons' favorite settings or created settings that they made themselves, or whatever. GURPS, Fate Core, the new version of Fate, and the like, are the latter. They're a generic-ish system that does very specific things for what they consider a broad idea of different genres, and then you adapt that to specific settings completely. It's not just, here's a rule set that will pretty much plug into what you're trying to do for your setting. Instead, here's a rule set that we want to plug into everything, and you have to make some choices about adapting it yourself, or what you allow or what you don't allow. while the latter is something a little bit more specific. For example, the Traveller role-playing system until very recently was, you bought the Traveller role-playing game and you played in the Imperium, and that was all there was. Now, some people have adapted it to a broader set of rules. Recently, Mongoose Publishing has done this, and that's kind of a neat thing, but it's just one of those more recent, trying to use a popular rule system to spread it to other games that the settings are people like, and they're semi-compatible with each other. Other examples of it would be the Iron Claw system, which is used for Iron Claw and Jade Claw, which is a very specific system for a very specific set of worlds that they designed, or the Shard role-playing game. And I don't know why I'm thinking of these lately, of these anthropomorphic ones. It's just they're the ones off the top of my head that I know have a specific system for a specific world. There are others. Fireborn was one. The original World of Darkness was more of the first type, like Dungeons and Dragons, where you got a game world and game setting and game setup, but it used a set of common rules elements. While New World of Darkness is more of the second type, where you have a generic rule system that is adapted individually to plug into the setting. So here's the adaptation that can be used regularly but has multiple worlds. Here's the adaptation that is by itself that you can plug into multiple worlds. And then the last is, one specific thing that is usually perfect for what that person's game setting, the writer's game setting is. Now, the reason I brought it up is because I wrote this game, High Valor, and High Valor was meant to be High Valor system. But a friend of mine liked the system a lot and adapted it to running games in other fictional worlds, and he really loved it. And I liked that idea. And I realized with this iteration of the system, as opposed to some of the early versions I was working with, it is easy to adapt to a variety of fairly similar settings, meaning settings which you can have epic events but are tied a little bit to the gritty side, where you can get killed fairly easily if you're not cautious, but you can still do epic things at the same time. It's just not, the risk reward is something the player character, the player through his character has to choose. And it's easy to see because I am adapting it to a couple of other settings that are slightly different. For instance, High Valor is set up to do Dark Ages folkloric fantasy. That means doing things like Beowulf or the Eddas or the Mabignon, or where there's great epic stories, but fairly, at least within some reason, what we might consider more mundane characters, as opposed to the Greek stories where it's almost always involving gods. You're still dealing with humans and human interactions with High Valor. And I'm adapting it and using it for a horror space opera game called Empire of Night, in which demons have flooded back into a fairly sci-fi-ish space opera, low space opera, high sci-fi, meaning it's on par with settings like Babylon 5, where you still have humans doing human things and that kind of thing, but overall it's about exploration and survival in this world that's been turned upside down by demons. It is not necessarily written to be hardcore science fiction. The science in it is a little soft on purpose. It's more about the drama of the characters in this setting. And there are no non-humans that are not demonic or supernatural tied to the demons in some way, meaning you play humans. And that works very well for using the High Valor system, which my friend has taken to calling the feat system, because you have feat rolls, and the feat rolls are, the difficulties are written on the character sheet. I'm also adapting it to a dark horror setting called Morngear. And basically this is all I really have time to talk about, but discuss it with me. Give me your ideas of what you want, how you like your game systems written, whether you prefer specific settings to specific systems, or whether you like adapting across the board for whatever system you like, or do you like plug and play, where there's a system you love and you'll use it across everything. Anyway, later.